Want to get ahead in digital-first content? The Drop is the go-to newsletter for industry professionals, delivering insider news, trends, and insights straight to your inbox. Navigate the fast-changing landscape of digital-first production, distribution, and monetization. Sign up now for free at dropmedia.co.uk and stay informed with The Drop. Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to another episode of TellyCast. And I'm really thrilled this week to have our guest, Rowan Collinson from Spotify. Rowan, how are you doing?
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Not at all. It's great to have you here. And it's kind of quite nerve-wracking for me because it's like, we're doing a show that's going out on Spotify with the audience lead of Spotify in the UK. So better be good. So welcome, and it's great to see you, and thanks for being on the show. So obviously we've seen Spotify really start to focus on video. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, just tell us a little bit about your role at Spotify and what that entails.
So I've been at Spotify for about 7.5 years now, and I've been working in and around the kind of push into podcasts, which started in the company in 2017. And really my role's been focused on kind of editorial and audience growth. So working with creators to help build audiences on platform and to present our content in new and compelling ways to get user to engage and kind of watching and listening to it.
It's been an extraordinary explosion, the podcast market, which doesn't seem to be showing any sign of abating, and it's obviously morphing and changing almost into TV in its own right. What do you think the key drivers of that have been? I mean, obviously Spotify's been one of them, but what do you think about, how the podcasting industry has changed over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and what's the reason for that, do you think?
Audio podcasts were fantastic because they allowed creators to build an audience by kind of intimacy and routine. And that was really fantastic. But discovery was always a real problem. Audio has always been really hard to kind of market. And, there's been many attempts over the years to do it in different forms. So I think obviously people started recording podcasts in vision, partly so they could have clips to put on social. And that journey has gone to, well, if you're recording clips, why not publish the whole thing? And what I do think is that video has really supercharged discovery and reach for those creators now. And it's allowed your podcast to really become the kind of centrifugal piece of your kind of ecosystem as a creator. It's the living and breathing thing that every week can allow you a content funnel of things which can feed your different social channels. And it can also build a community which allows you to go into live, it allows you to go into merch, it can go into newsletters. It's a really, really, really kind of flexible asset. And for me, that's why kind of video makes so much sense in the medium now.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually, is why video is such a focus for Spotify in podcasting right now.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen is that video really deepens user engagement with our platform. Our users love video. 390 million of them have watched a video podcast on platform. 70% have watched video in the foreground. So it really feels like a very natural evolution for us. And I mean, one of the reasons I love working at Spotify is we're really focused on making sure that our users, when they spend time with us, it's time well spent. Whether that's kind of watching a really great interview show, watching a load of 80s pop videos like I did last night, doing a fitness class with a Peloton video content we've just onboarded. We want our users to come away from a time with Spotify feeling like they've got no regrets. So video plays a really kind of key part in that. I think for creators, publishers and producers, it's twofold. Then it's about reach, and that can be local reach, but also global reach. And also now revenue with the Spotify partner program we've launched. I think chatting to any creator, as I'm sure you do all the time, right? Reach and revenue are two different things, and Spotify are able to offer that. What's not to like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the partner program in a little while if we can. But I think, one of the great opportunities now, particularly for TV producers who are confronted with this new digital first reality, this new marketplace that we're looking at, and the way that the traditional TV industry is changing and adapting, it gives creators and studios and anybody who's got a great idea the opportunity to start to build a real ecosystem, like you were saying earlier on about, creating the podcast to begin with. And then there's, I recently talked about the How to Make Money in Digital event, about the octopus strategy, where you're putting your IP in the center, and all of these different arms are ways to monetize that. So, I mean, I think it's an amazing opportunity to actually create IP, and IP ownership is obviously really, really crucial. And we're seeing so many studios being really, really successful in that area.
Yeah, massively. And I think it's a real step change for people who've worked in traditional TV production, where, you'll spend some 6 to 12 months developing an idea, filming it, shooting it, delivering 6 episodes to a broadcaster and saying, well, that's that. For Spotify, that doesn't really work, because the content which works best on our platform is kind of always on shows, because audiences with a product like ours, which is portable and mobile, love the routine. And they're also used to content which kind of is evolving every week. And I think it's really interesting. You look at a couple of the biggest shows on our platform. So, for example, Diary of a CEO or The Rest is History. If you go back kind of 5 years ago to their first episodes, they really are radically different to what you have now. And I think, in both those cases, the producers there, Flight Story and Goalhanger, are really smart in that they really look at their data, they take on board the audience feedback through comments and on social, and really feed that into the show and iterate week on week. And I think that success is down to that, really. And I think having brilliant talent as well. And I think that traditional TV producers could learn a lot from that approach.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit, about TV producers, because I think for TV producers moving into the digital first space, the easiest, the most logical, most cost effective, and the most likely to succeed with a kernel of an idea is podcasting, isn't it? And as you say, it's the idea about iterating and finding your audience and working out what works and what doesn't. What do you think that perhaps the key pointers for TV producers who may be moving into the podcasting market might consider, and maybe what are the common mistakes you think that they might make?
I think understand the market. One look at the Spotify charts in the UK will tell you that, some of the genres which do really well for us, for example, are comedy, true crime, kind of factual. And it's worth looking at the kind of areas you're strong in and really thinking, well, what kind of podcast adjacent, as we sometimes call them, ideas do you have, and how could that help you kind of come to market? And I think coming armed with that kind of knowledge is really helpful. What's great about traditional television production is they have great relationships with talent, right? And they're used to being able to produce things at volume and things at scale. So they've got all the bits there. It's just a kind of rethinking of how you do it and how your production process is. I think the other thing from talking to a lot of TV producers as well is that in TV, you work hard to a deadline to deliver to a commissioner, and everything's got to look pitch perfect and beautiful, and everything's got to be spot on for a linear TX. I mean, with podcasts, it's a much more forgiving medium. You can experiment. You can change your lighting in the second episode. You can change your set. If a format point doesn't work, you can move it around. Like, the audience don't really care. But if the conversation is good and the content is compelling and interesting, they'll stick around.
Yeah, that kernel of an idea, if you're serving a need that's not met anywhere else,
exactly,
you can iterate around that.
Exactly. I mean, I think the other thing as well is the availability of data. I think often when you make telly, you're just working in the dark, apart from, some barb figures and some audience insights, which might have come out 2 years ago. Here, with a platform like Spotify and Spotify for Creators, you've got living, breathing data around what your audience are doing and their behaviour, where they are, how old they are, when they're listening, whether they're foregrounding or backgrounding. It's really powerful stuff. And when you combine that with the comments on platform, you can get a real sense of your audience really quickly, and that can help you tailor your content and iterate much faster.
Yeah. So, well, let's take the example of a TV producer who is maybe has got a great idea now, or they might be delving through their archives of great TV shows that some commissioner turned down, and they're like dusting that off and thinking, actually, that was an amazing idea that we had. Maybe we can do it as a podcast. I mean, what would you say? What practical advice would you say would you give to a TV producer, maybe in the first 30 days of creating this podcast? Say it's a weekly show. Well, should it be a weekly show, first of all? What's the sort of cadence, perhaps, that you might consider? What is, what are the basic steps and practical advice that you would have for them?
I think really to make a successful show on Spotify, you need to be always on. So you need to be aiming for that kind of magic 50 weeks a year mark. We'll give you a couple of weeks off over Christmas holiday, but regularity and consistency will help you build routine with your audience.
Yeah,
and that's
I've been really remiss in this area for the last few weeks, but I'm back on the horse again now. But but I've been really aware of that actually as well. The fact that Sam Barcroft once told me, it's like, you have to turn up every week for your audience. And it's really important, isn't it, to maintain that relationship and build that sort of library and audience trust as well.
And I think that's it, right? It is a relationship with an audience. This isn't a passive audience like watching on a TV. This is an audience who are invested in it because of that intimacy that the format brings. And if you can build that bond with an audience, it can really help you, build a community, which in turn can let you do other more exciting things and create new revenue streams. So if I were a TV producer kind of looking at the ideas I've got or things I might want to reversion, I'd really think, well, what's here that I could do weekly and regularly, which would be simple to produce? And also, what is there that people can latch onto in it? What's the thing? What's the thing that's in it that, I could potentially spin out into a live show, or I could spin into a club, or I could spin into a newsletter? Really thinking of it as an ecosystem rather than just a show.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Because it is IP at the end of the day. It's not just a show. It's an actual, as we mentioned earlier on, it's the center of a sort of content universe or potential content universe.
Yeah. And I mean, I started my career in independent production, so I've sat on both sides of the fence. And, I remember in the noughties, we had real battles with commissioners to allow us to, we wanted to do live shows around shows we made, and we wanted to do more with them. We wanted to try and get them onto TV at the time. And it's like, it was just impossible. So owning your own content and owning your own destiny in this market is fantastic. And I think video podcasts and Spotify can play a really key role in that.
Yeah. And there's some great examples of that. You mentioned earlier on, I think Goldhanger have really sort of set the standard, haven't they? Of being able to create amazing podcast shows that build audiences, but also I think they've got a whole festival happening on the South Bank in London this year around their shows.
And if you're an Apple stan for A Rest Is History, you can go to Hampton Court this summer and meet the talent and take part in all kinds of activities. I mean, what they've built is fantastic. And, at Spotify, we're very lucky to have a close relationship with them. And it's been a really satisfying thing to watch them grow and to work with them. Yeah.
No, it's been, many broadcasters I've spoken to over the last few years, we're always trying to find that fresh look at history, how they can bring new, younger, fresher audiences to history, which, and they've been able to do that in a really, really effective way.
Definitely.
So you mentioned data. And that's one of the things that producers and creators, well, not necessarily creators, if you like, but TV producers moving into going digital first. There's an enormous amount of data across all the different platforms that they're publishing on. When it comes to the data that they're seeing in Spotify in the back end, what are the key sort of points that they should take notice of? What are the key watch outs for them? What's the data they should be looking for? Because it's not only downloads, is it? It's other aspects as well.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing is that Spotify Creators has a really comprehensive set of kind of metrics that you can see, which update on a daily basis. And if I was a producer now, really what I'd be concentrating on is retention, how long are people listening to my show? Where are they dropping off? What does that graph look like? And you can do that at a show and an episode level basis. And I think for me, that's a really key thing which will help you kind of grow your show, because the longer people are listening to and the more they're kind of coming back to it episode after episode will help you really kind of build a compelling show. You know, if I'd had that when I was a producer 15 years ago, I would have lapped it up.
Yeah. So as well as obviously that data, the key question that everybody's always got is, how do you make money? How does a creator make money on Spotify? So from a video first perspective, you know, why should a producer focus on Spotify and how can they generate revenue, and how does that work?
So back at the start of 2025, we launched a Spotify partner program. And the premise is very simple, really. You join the program and you upload your video to Spotify for Creators. We insert ads into it, and those ads go out on Spotify on the free tier. But in the premium tier, we remove those ads for the premium subscribers and we give you the money. So it's a win-win, really. For your audience, it's a great way of them hearing your content or viewing your content rather with less interruptions. And for us, it creates a kind of added value to our premium users. And for you, it's revenue that you can put back into your show to help grow it. So you've got that. And what's great about that is obviously it doesn't stop you from doing other kind of sponsorships around that piece, whether it's branded cushions on your sofas while you're doing an interview, or whether it's doing burnt in kind of adverts or reads, or working with a third party sales house to do that. What it does give you is the partner program gives you a kind of consistent revenue streams. In fact, one of the many tentacles of your content octopus that you talked about earlier.
In terms of a lot of TV producers and a lot of content creators have been looking at YouTube, for example, and looking at 1 million views will deliver what many people might think is not a great deal of money. It's kind of peanuts, really. I mean, how does Spotify compare to that in terms of, you know, I know there's probably not a per view calculation as such, but can you just give us a bit of a sense of how that's different on Spotify?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to compare platform to platform, as you know. For certain types of content, we've seen evidence that creators are finding it a really good place to be. For example, we've worked with a creator called Bella Fiore, who's a true crime creator, who's from Australia, based in London, and she's been actively telling us that, you know, her show is now making more money on Spotify than it was on YouTube. So it's great to hear those kind of stories from creators.
Yeah. And you talked about, you know, the Spotify charts and what's really working from a content perspective. Can you just talk us through that in a little bit more detail? What really works well in terms of genres on Spotify?
Yeah, of course. And it's actually been really interesting because we've seen kind of 3 genres, I'd say, really, really pop at the moment. Firstly, kind of comedy is having a real moment for us. And it's this very kind of young, alternative kind of comedy. One of the breakout creators for us has been Finn versus History, which is Finn Taylor and Horatio Gould, who are both fantastic.
Yeah, I love that show.
Their show, they come on in what can only be described as kind of 1970s university lecturer suit and take a historical subject and then destroy it in the kind of most surreal and vaguely obscene way.
Yeah,
and
it's pretty out there, isn't it?
It's really fantastic. And, you know, it's been an absolute delight to see that rocket up the charts over the last kind of 18 months. And they've built a fantastic community around that, which has been able to go live. Finn's got a book coming out later this year. And I think that shows like that, shows like Ghost Huns, which is 2 female comics doing a kind of paranormal investigation show, and Mike Rice and Vittorio Angeloni, who are 2 London Irish comedians who do a show called Mike and Vittorio's Guide to Parenting, which contains no parenting. Those shows are really great examples of shows which have done really well in the partner program and have built community and audience. So young comedians experimenting with long-form visual comedy is definitely an area which is popping. Interview shows, I mean, I think obviously a core thing for audio podcasts, but I think naturally that has extended to video too. Spotify in the UK, we're very lucky to work with Louis Theroux and his team at Mindhouse, and he's done a really great job of transferring his unique style into that format, and that's been really successful for us. While Our team in the US have been working with Amy Poehler on Good Hang. I watched her with Billie Eilish on the way here today. And again, that won a Golden Globe earlier this year, which was super exciting for everything involved. And in the last 6 months, everyone from Ramesh Ranganathan to Olivia Attwood to Joe Marler have launched kind of video interview shows. So that is a format that audiences really can't get enough of. And I think it's relatively easy to produce, and giving the opportunities for talent to be able to talk in depth about things they're passionate about, that's a real thing for us.
Yeah. I mean, does that begs the question, you talked about, lots of great talent who are running their own podcast shows, and talent are approaching the new production economy in different ways as well, obviously. Now, particularly those who might typically have looked at TV as being their main path, there's still loads and loads of different opportunities for them. 2 questions, I suppose. First of all, does that mean that it's oversaturated when it comes to, the talent market and the talent podcasts that are out there? Are there still fresh new opportunities, do you think, for talent-led podcasts? And second of all, do you need talent? Does talent have to be, is that what gets you to first base, if you like?
I think there's always opportunities for new formats. There's always innovation. And, and you've seen that with Ramesh's show, which, in the last 6 months has become one of the biggest shows of us. It's a really fantastic show. And
in just a few months, right?
Yeah, exactly, And I think watching Ramesh and Louis Theroux geeking out about 90s hip-hop and both writing to Hip Hop Connection under pen names, you can really see why.
Yeah.
But I also think there's room for other genres as well. I mean, true crime, for example, has been a genre which has traditionally done very well in audio podcasting. And it's been very interesting to see creators and production companies using their skills in this area to kind of transfer it into kind of a visual space. So you've got people like Ellen and Neil who are really kind of popping with a very simple kind of visual-led storytelling format. But other companies like Curve Media in the UK who started as a traditional factual production company, but have been able to take the skills they learn in that area and, led by Naomi Channel, who's fantastic there, who's one of their creative leads, build up a show called Totally True Crime, which is a weekly, always-on true crime show. And the visuals are made using video sourced from public domain, body cam footage, stuff that you would have done in traditional TV production, but translated into this space. And because of that, they've been able to make a really effective, cost-effective, always-on show, which is building audience and bringing them in revenue, which they're now using to explore other areas.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really exciting model for people.
So true crime, comedy and interview are probably the 3 that you pick out there. I mean, do you think there are any genres that are underserved particularly? Do you see, I don't know, I mean, I've seen loads of football. Obviously, football's going to be huge over the World Cup, and there's no shortage.
No shortage of football podcasts.
Of former footballers as well, turning podcasters as well, yeah. But I mean, do you think, what are the maybe other areas that you see maybe starting to bubble up, develop, that might be interesting to watch?
We definitely love to see more longer form content with younger kind of female Gen Z creators. I think that group has been served very well by short form and vertical video, but I think there's a really big space for that. And, shows like Girls Bathroom have done well in that area. And I think that there's definitely room in that market for more voices.
So finally, well, two last questions. A penultimate question is that, for TV producers who want to get into space, I mean, obviously there's no barrier. They can just go and do it pretty much. It's all pretty straightforward in terms of starting your first podcast. But how can they work with you? What sort of scale of podcast do you start a conversation with when it comes to a partnership manager? You mentioned Ramesh, you mentioned Louis Theroux, for example. These are really, really successful. How do you work with them in a sort of collaborative way?
We work with partners of all different shapes and sizes, really, from big established studios like Z55 and, kind of traditional TV production companies through to bigger beasts like Goalhanger and Platform. free to solely independent creators. You know, I mean, a good example of that is Mike and Victoria, who I mentioned earlier, who just came to us. The program is anyone can join, and you know, I just advise reaching out to us. We're really open, you know, and if we feel that, you know, the content's strong and there's an opportunity from them, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it was interesting. I saw your deal with Channel 4.
Yes.
So there's a whole lot of their Channel 4.0 content that's actually coming out on Spotify as well. So that's really interesting.
And that's been really exciting. And I think credit to Channel 4 for being really forward thinking in this space. And, you know, I know they've had real success with Channel 4.0 over the last couple of years. And, you know, from Channel 4's perspective, they understand that Spotify is a home of younger, diverse audiences. And therefore, with a format like Don't Get Catfished with Nella Rose, it's an absolute perfect fit for us. So yeah, we're looking forward to continuing that relationship and deepening it with it.
It's really interesting, I think, as well, just looking at the market when you've seen, you know, really established radio companies like Global and Bauer and others. They are starting to be major players in the podcast space, visual podcast space. So it's almost like radio businesses are becoming TV businesses or video first companies as well. And, you know, I've seen they're acquiring Fellas Studios, for example, and others. So it's a really interesting and dynamic marketplace, isn't it?
It's really exciting, you know, and credit for Global for their ambition and energy in the space, really. You know, they're one of our partners. And yeah, I think everyone in the industry was really impressed by the Fellas acquisition. You know, they're a fantastic studio who really understand Gen Z audiences. And if I was wanting to reach young audiences, I'd want to be buying them as well.
Yeah. So finally, looking ahead then, Rowan, to the next 2-3 years, I mean, I'm really excited because it's still such a young industry. It's really sort of 10 years old or so, really, isn't it? You know, something like that. It's not. So it still feels like at a point where it's developing and it's almost picking up pace, particularly when it comes to Spotify and video as well. Over the next 2-3 years, how would you advise, again, a TV producer who's thinking over the next 2-3 years and focusing their business around Spotify and around podcasting? What would you advise them to think about?
I just think do it. If anything, I think people spend too much time kind of thinking about things. I think if you've got access to talent and you've got access to exciting ideas or IP that you can potentially reversion, then just go for it. You know, the barrier to entry now is so much lower than it was even 2 years ago. Yeah. And you, as TV producers, you've got access to people who understand the space, and you've got access to people with great talents. You've got access to people who know how to make something look good, and you've got access to people who understand the pacing of visual content. Yeah. And I think when you combine that with people who really understand the digital landscape and who understand the kind of power of podcasting, that kind of intimacy and routine we talk about, you know, you can have a lot of success there. And, you know, for me, that's really exciting. I mean, the podcast industry, you know, we're still building a plane in flight, essentially. And that's what gets me up in the morning. And that's why, you know, I'm so excited to be part of Spotify and be part of what we're doing. And, you know, particularly that no regrets strategy we have, you know, how can you make content that our audience wants to watch and makes them feel good?
Yeah. So now it's time for Story of the Week, Rowan, a regular format point on the show. Yeah. What's your Story of the Week?
So it's been a bank holiday, so it's been a slightly slower news week than usual. But one thing which caught my eye this week was the announcement of a new company called Rosebery Studios. They are new to the market and they're made up of various people who've worked in TV and digital industries globally. And they are focused on what they call the verticalization of TV content. And they announced this week that they've done a bunch of pretty chunky deals with people like All Free Media and Banijay and various others to take their libraries and to essentially reversion them into vertical video. So I think this is two things which are really interesting. Firstly, for anyone who is doubting the power of vertical video, you know, this is a format which has really come in age. And I know you and the TellyCast community have been talking about it loads. I've really enjoyed Matt Campion talking about it on the show a couple of weeks ago. And it's quite clear that the vertical video is going to become a really key kind of content deliverable for studios. And secondly, I just think it's interesting because it shows traditional companies really thinking about other revenue streams, right? So why wouldn't you reversion your content where you've already got into vertical format if it's where the audience are?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that and I thought it was really interesting with two points. I mean, first of all, kind of flies in the face of the way that microdrama has become successful up to this point, because it's obviously shot and developed and created for vertical, as opposed to reversioning old content, some of which will work, just because of camera angles and everything, some which won't. But I thought the other interesting aspect is, there's not really much of a sustainable revenue model that certainly in the UK for producing vertical video just yet. And it still seems so young. So I thought that was really interesting. Maybe it is just a catalogue reversioning play.
I guess it's also about attention, right? I mean, there was a fantastic piece in The Atlantic a couple of weeks ago about the rise of clips as a form of entertainment in themselves. And obviously, everyone who's worked in digital over the years has talked, over the last 10 to 15 years, has talked about clips as being a way of content discovery, and like me, has probably been ended up in countless different experiments with how to do clips in different formats.
Yeah.
But it's quite clear now that clips have become their own source of entertainment because of the way platforms are built. So I don't think it's any surprise that people are coming to the space and looking to reversion, because it's about attention. And I don't know, if people are watching short form vertical clips of Bridgerton, hopefully that will make them go and explore the catalogue.
Yeah, no, interesting. And how about your hero of the week?
This was really easy because yesterday they announced that Saturday Night Live UK was going to be recommissioned for second season. I'm gonna hold my peace for a second. So my hero is Phil Edgar Jones at the team at Sky for, really taking a big and frankly quite expensive risk on new talent. Albeit in a very successful existing format, and for making it a success. And it's been
Has it been a success though? Viewing figures are, have really settled to around about 100,000 on traditional network play out, but I know socially it's done very well.
Yeah, and I think really if you look at the kind of profile of people like Jack Shepp and Anya Magliano and George Fouracres, what they've done is really helped bring the next generation of British talent through. And I think that has to be applauded. And in the world that we operate in, we talk all the time about on-demand content and flexibility. But sometimes when you watch something live, you can't beat that excitement and energy. And certainly I loved watching Amy Lee Wood being escorted round by a four-law manager from one sketch to another last week. The only thing I'd ask is, could you put it on at 9 p.m. rather than 10? Because I keep drifting off just after Weekend Update.
Okay, all right. Saturday Night Live been recommissioned for another 12, did you say?
I think, another 12 episodes in the autumn, which I think, it's exciting times for them.
And finally, Rowan, who or what are you telling to get in the bin?
Oh, dear. Well, I think we're recording this the day after the local elections, so there are some obvious names that it's very tempting to say, but sticking in the kind of media, I don't have anyone massively to put in the bin, but I did raise eyebrows at the Guardian's article over the weekend that the big BBC cuts for incoming would be focused on news and they were going to take the brunt of them. So I think 15 rather than 10%. Yeah. Now, I think everyone who watches your show has got an opinion on the BBC. They've probably all worked for them. But I think, certainly in my personal view, one of the great crown jewels is BBC News. And in an age of disinformation and division, I think it's one of the kind of things we should be most proud of.
Absolutely.
So I do...
That should maybe be the focus to preserve as opposed
to... I would definitely encourage some of the managers there making those decisions and putting that story out to perhaps go to their nearest waste disposal unit.
Yeah, and look at some other areas to trim, perhaps.
Exactly.
Rowan, thank you so much
for
coming on the show. Me. Great to have you on, and good luck with everything at Spotify.
Brilliant.
Of course, we'll be watching everything that you guys are doing, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's about it for another week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. TellyCast is produced by Spirit Studios and recorded in London. We'll be back next week with another show.